Welcome to Midnight Whispers, the place where shadows stretch longer than the daylight and the quiet of the wild seems alive. Tonight, we're heading to Alaska, a land of endless winter nights, forgotten mining towns, and dark forests where the cold feels like it's watching you. These aren't campfire stories. They're true accounts, local legends, and first-hand encounters gathered from people who swore they'd never speak of them again. As we step into this frozen frontier together, remember, every sound carries farther in the cold, and sometimes, something might be listening back. Before we begin, make sure you've subscribed and tapped the bell. You don't want to miss what lurks in the next whisper. Now, pull your coat tight. The story begins here, where the ice holds secrets older than memory. Story 1. Thing in Denali, the moose was standing like a man when I first saw it. That's the part nobody believes. The detail that makes people think I'm crazy or lying or suffering from altitude sickness. But I know what I saw on that trail in Denali National Park, and I know it saw me too. I am a wildlife photographer, 47 years old, been doing this for 22 years, traveled to every continent except Antarctica. I photographed grizzlies in Catman, wolves in Yellowstone, and mountain lions in Colorado. I know the difference between an animal and a person. I know how light plays tricks at distance. And I know that what I encountered on the Savage Alpine Trail in March wasn't any kind of optical illusion. The assignment was simple. A nature magazine wanted shots of Denali, its winter wildlife, for a feature on Alaska, its extreme ecosystems. I spent 3 days photographing caribou, ptarmigan, and the occasional fox. The weather had been brutal, temperatures hovering around -20, but I dealt with worse. On the 4th day, I decided to hike further into the backcountry, away from the few other winter visitors. That's where you find the best shots, in the places people usually go. I set out at dawn, which in March means around 9 in the morning. The trail was buried under 4 feet of snow, but I had snowshoes and knew how to use them. The park was silent in that way only winter wilderness can be. No birds, no wind, just the crunch of my snowshoes and my own breathing, loud in my ears. The mountain loomed above me, Denali itself, massive and indifferent, hidden partially by low clouds. 3 hours in, I saw the tracks. Moose tracks, fresh, punched deep into the snow. But they were wrong. The pattern was off. Moose walk in a specific way, their gait leaving a recognizable trail. These tracks started normal, that distinctive cloven hoof print, then changed. They became narrower, more deliberate, almost like something was walking on 2 legs instead of 4. I followed them. Professional curiosity, I told myself. Unusual animal behavior makes for interesting photographs. The tracks led off the main trail into a grove of snow-covered spruce trees. The temperature seemed to drop as I entered the grove, and the silence became oppressive, physical, like the air itself was holding its breath. That is when I saw it, standing in a small clearing about 50 yards ahead. The moose, except it wasn't standing like a moose. It was upright, balanced on its hind legs, front legs hanging at its sides in a way that looked too much like arms. Its head, that massive moose head with its broad antlers, tilted at an angle that reminded me of someone listening intently. I froze. My camera was already in my hands, an automatic response from years of training. I lifted it slowly, trying not to make any sudden movements, and looked through the viewfinder. Through the lens, the details became clearer and somehow worse. The moose's front legs weren't just hanging. They were positioned like human arms, the joints bending in ways that weren't natural for a quadruped. And its eyes, those large dark eyes, were fixed directly on me with an intelligence that made my stomach clench. I took the shot. The shutter sound seemed impossibly loud in the silence. And in that instant, the moose changed. Not slowly, not gradually. One moment it was standing upright, and the next it was on all fours, a normal moose, head lowered to browse on the sparse vegetation poking through the snow. As if nothing had happened, as if I imagined the whole thing. But I had the photo. I checked my camera, its display screen. There it was, crystal clear. The moose standing like a human, front legs positioned like arms, head cocked in that listening pose. Proof, evidence, something to show people when they inevitably didn't believe my story. I backed away slowly, keeping my eyes on the animal. It didn't look at me again, just kept browsing, completely normal. But as I retreated, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Around the clearing, in the snow, were more tracks. Not moose tracks, human footprints. Bare human footprints. Dozens of them, circling the area where the moose had been standing. All leading to and from the exact spot. I ran. I am not proud of it. But survival instinct kicked in and I crashed back through the spruce grove. Back toward the main trail. My snowshoes catching on hidden branches, my camera banging against my chest. I didn't stop until I reached the trail. And even then I kept moving, kept putting distance between myself and that clearing. When I finally stopped to catch my breath, the sun had shifted. Late afternoon now, shadows growing long across the snow. I checked my camera again, needing to confirm that the photo was real, that I hadn't hallucinated the whole encounter. The display screen was blank. Not off. Blank. White. I cycled through my photos. Everything from the morning was there. Everything from the hike in. But the shot of the standing moose was gone. Just gone. In its place was a white screen with a single black spot in the center, growing larger as I watched, spreading across the display like ink in water. My camera died. Completely. Battery full according to the indicator, but the screen went black and it wouldn't turn back on. I tried everything, removing and reinserting the battery, checking the memory card, even hitting it in frustration. Nothing. The camera was dead. I hiked out as fast as I could, made it back to the park entrance just as full darkness fell. The ranger on duty, a woman named Sarah who I checked in with that morning, asked how my day went. I started to tell her about the moose, about the tracks, about what I'd seen. But the words sounded insane as I spoke them. A moose standing like a person. Human footprints in the snow. A photo that disappeared. She listened with the patient expression of someone who heard strange stories before, then gently suggested that the extreme cold and isolation could affect perception, especially for solo hikers. She pulled out a binder filled with incident reports and flipped to a section marked with a yellow tab. Sightings, the header read. She showed me page after page of reports from other hikers, other photographers, other park visitors, all describing the same thing. Moose that stood upright. Moose that appeared human for brief moments. Moose that seemed to watch people with unnatural intelligence. The reports went back decades, some from the 70s, even earlier, all dismissed as optical illusions, altitude effects, or misidentification in poor lighting. But there were patterns in the reports. The sightings always happened in winter, always in isolated areas, and the witnesses always reported the same feeling of being watched, of being studied, as if the moose was evaluating them somehow. Several reports mentioned cameras malfunctioning after taking photos. 3 mentioned finding human tracks near the moose sightings. Sarah closed the binder and told me something the Park Service didn't publicize. 7 hikers had gone missing in Denali over the past 30 years. All in winter. Also, all experienced outdoorsmen who knew the terrain. Search parties found their gear, their supplies, sometimes their cameras. But never the hikers themselves. And in each case, the last photos on their cameras showed the same thing. A moose, standing upright, watching. I left Alaska the next day. Didn't even try to salvage the assignment. But the story doesn't end there. It followed me home. 2 weeks after I got back to my apartment in Seattle, I woke up to find tracks in the snow outside my building. Moose tracks? Impossible, since there are no moose in Seattle. The tracks led from the street to my window, then changed to human footprints right at the base of the wall. Bare human footprints in snow, 3 stories up, on a sheer wall. My camera, the one that died in Denali, turned itself on one night. I left it in a drawer, battery removed, waiting to take it in for repairs. I woke to a clicking sound and found it sitting on my desk, powered on, the screen glowing. The display showed a photo, not one I'd taken, a photo of me, sleeping in my bed, taken from the perspective of someone standing in my room. And in the reflection of my bedroom window, visible just barely, was a shape. Tall, antlered, standing upright. I've moved twice since then. Changed cities, changed jobs, stopped doing wildlife photography entirely. But every few months, I find tracks. Always moose tracks that transition to human footprints. Always leading to my door, my window, wherever I'm living. And I started noticing them in other places too. In the backgrounds of news photos from Alaska. In tourist videos from Denali. Brief glimpses of moose standing where they shouldn't. Positioned in ways that aren't natural. watching the camera with those two intelligent eyes. I tried researching it. Alaskan folklore mentions shapeshifters, spirits that move between animal and human forms. The native peoples have stories about boundary crossers, beings that exist in the spaces between the natural and supernatural. But those stories always talk about the shapeshifters as dangerous, as predatory, as things that lure people away from safety and into the wilderness where they disappear forever. Last week, I received a package. No return address. Inside was a memory card, the kind used in digital cameras. My hands shook as I loaded it into my laptop. One file, one photo, the image I'd taken in that clearing in Denali, the photo that had disappeared from my camera. The moose standing upright, front legs positioned like arms, head tilted. But this version of the photo was different. Higher resolution, clearer detail, and I could see things I hadn't noticed before. The moose, his eyes weren't moose eyes. They were human eyes, green and aware and looking directly at the camera with unmistakable intention. And its front legs, the ones hanging like arms, ended not in hooves but in hands. Human hands with long fingers, blurred slightly as if they were in motion, reaching toward the camera. But the worst part, the detail that keeps me awake at night, was the background. In the trees behind the moose, partially obscured by branches and snow, were more figures. Dozens of them, all standing upright, all watching, and some of them were wearing clothes, tattered, outdated clothes, hiking gear from different eras. And I recognized one of the figures, a man I met briefly at the park entrance on my second day in Denali, another photographer who said he was heading into the backcountry. A man who, according to the news reports I found later, never came back. I don't know what they are. Not really. Maybe they re something that has always been in Alaska, in the deep wilderness, older than the park, older than human settlement. Maybe they re what happens when the boundary between human and animal breaks down in places isolated enough and extreme enough. Maybe they collect people who wander too far alone, absorbing them somehow, adding them to their number. What I do know is that the tracks keep appearing, and they are getting closer. Last night, I found them on my balcony, 4 stories up, impossible to reach without climbing gear. Moose tracks that became human footprints right outside my sliding glass door. And pressed against the glass, visible in the condensation, was a handprint. A human handprint, much too large, with 6 fingers instead of 5. I'm writing this as a warning, a testimony, whatever you want to call it. If you ever find yourself hiking alone in Alaska, as backcountry, if you encounter a moose that doesn't behave quite right, if you see tracks that change from animal to human, turn around. Don, to take photos. Don, to investigate. Don, to let curiosity override your survival instinct. Because some things in the wilderness errand, to animals pretending to be human. They read something else entirely, something that is learned to wear both shapes, and they were always watching for the next person who wanders too far from safety. The tracks appeared again this morning, inside my apartment this time, leading from my front door to my bedroom, and my camera, the dead one I kept as a reminder, turned itself on again. One new photo, me, sitting at my desk, writing this, and in the window reflection behind me, barely visible, a shape with antlers. So here is my question for you. If something impossible kept appearing in your life, kept leaving evidence it shouldn't, to be able to leave, would you keep running? Or would you finally turn around and face it, even knowing you might not like what you find? Let me know in the comments, because I think I'm out of places to run to. And I think whatever has been following me from Denali is almost ready to show me what it really wants. Story 2. Walkers of Sitka. The woman walked through my living room wall like it was made of water. That is when I knew I had made a terrible mistake buying this house in Sitka. I am a contractor from Boise, Idaho. 51 years old, divorced, kids grown and gone. When the investment opportunity came up to buy and flip a foreclosed property in Alaska, the numbers looked too good to pass up. A 3-bedroom house with ocean views in Sitka for less than I'd pay for a studio apartment back home. The realtor mentioned the house had been empty for years, that it needed work, but I'd been renovating properties for 30 years. I could handle anything. What she didn't mention was why it had been empty. What she didn't mention was what happened in this neighborhood back in 1991. I arrived in Sitka on a gray February afternoon. The town clung to the coastline, Mountains rising behind it, the Pacific stretching cold and dark to the west. Snow covered everything. Unusual for coastal Alaska, the locals told me. But this winter had been brutal. The house sat on a street that ended at a steep embankment overlooking the water. Half the homes on the block were abandoned, windows dark, yards overgrown beneath the snow. The first week was normal. I spent my days ripping out damaged drywall, replacing rotted floorboards, the usual renovation work. The house was in worse shape than the inspection had suggested, but nothing I couldn't fix. At night, I'd sit in my sleeping bag in the one room I made livable, eating takeout and planning the next day's work. The isolation didn't bother me. I worked alone on projects before, but on the 8th night, I heard footsteps. Not outside, inside, upstairs in the bedrooms I hadn't started renovating yet. Slow, deliberate footsteps, like someone pacing back and forth. I grabbed my flashlight and went to investigate. The upstairs was empty, dark. My footprints in the dust on the floor were the only ones. But I could still hear the footsteps, fainter now, moving away from me down the hallway. I told myself it was the house settling, old wood contracting in the cold. But the sound was too regular, too much like actual footsteps. I went back downstairs and tried to sleep, but the pacing continued above me until almost 3 in the morning, then stopped abruptly. The next day, I asked my supplier about the neighborhood while picking up materials. He was a local, third-generation Sitka resident, and his expression changed when I told him my address. He asked if I knew about the tsunami. I didn't. He told me to visit the library, look at the newspaper archives from October 1991. He said I needed to understand what I moved into. The library was downtown, a modern building with views of the harbor. The librarian, an older woman with knowing eyes, didn't seem surprised when I asked about the 1991 tsunami. She pulled up the digital archives without comment, like she'd done this before for other people. The tsunami had hit on October 19th, just after midnight. A magnitude 7.3 earthquake off the coast, barely felt in town, but powerful enough to generate a wave. No warning, no time to evacuate. The wave was only 12 feet high, but it was enough. It struck the lower neighborhoods, the ones closest to the water, with devastating force. 14 people died, dozens more were injured, entire blocks were destroyed. My street had been hit hardest. 8 of the 14 deaths occurred within 2 blocks of my house. The wave had surged up the embankment, smashing through ground floors, collapsing walls, dragging debris and people back into the ocean when it receded. The article included photos. My house was there, or what was left of it. The first floor had been gutted, the front wall torn away, furniture and belongings scattered across the yard. But that wasn't the strangest part. In the weeks following the tsunami, survivors reported seeing people in the destroyed neighborhoods, walking through the ruins, examining the damage, looking for something. The witnesses described them as translucent, slightly out of focus, dressed in pajamas or nightclothes. And they moved wrong, walking through walls or furniture as if those obstacles didn't exist. The reports were consistent enough that the local paper ran a story about the tsunami ghosts, interviewing multiple witnesses who had seen the same figures. The authorities dismissed it as trauma, grief, and stress manifesting as hallucinations. But the sightings continued for months, always in the tsunami zone, always the same figures, and always during the early morning hours, around the time the wave had struck. I left the library with a sick feeling in my stomach. That night, I heard the footsteps again. But this time, I stayed downstairs and listened. The pacing upstairs went on for 20 minutes, then stopped. And I heard something else. Water. The sound of water dripping, slow and steady, coming from the ceiling above me. I looked up and saw wet spots forming on the drywall, spreading outward in dark patches. I ran upstairs. The floor was dry. No leaks, no water damage. But when I came back down, the ceiling was soaked, water now dripping in multiple places, forming puddles on the floor. And the puddles weren't clean water. They were dark, filled with sediment, and smelled like the ocean, like salt and seaweed and something rotting. I grabbed my coat and left the house. Spent the night in my truck, parked in a grocery store lot, trying to convince myself there was a logical explanation. A burst pipe, condensation, something structural I missed during inspection. But I knew the truth. I'd read enough of those newspaper articles. I'd seen enough of those witness testimonies. The house wasn't just damaged by the tsunami. It remembered it. The next morning, I went back. The water was gone. The ceiling was dry. No stains. No damage. As if nothing had happened. But on the living room floor, I found footprints. Wet footprints. That same ocean water, leading from the base of the stairs to the front wall. They stopped at the wall. Didn't turn. Didn't go around. Just ended. As if whoever made them had walked straight through. That, when I saw her for the first time, standing in the corner of the room, partially transparent, her form flickering like bad television reception. She was young, maybe 30, wearing a nightgown that was soaked through. Her hair hung wet around her face. She stared at the wall, not at me, as if I wasn't there. Then she walked straight toward the wall, and through it. She didn't open a door or find a gap. She just passed through the solid wall like it was air. I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. I stood there for a full minute after she disappeared, my heart hammering, my hands shaking. When I finally forced myself to check the other side of the wall, the yard was empty. But there were wet footprints in the snow, leading from the house toward the embankment, toward the ocean. I called the realtor, demanded to know why she hadn't. She told me about the tsunami, about the deaths, about the reports of ghosts. She got defensive, said the deaths were public record, that I should have done my research, that paranormal activity wasn't something she was legally required to disclose. She reminded me that I bought the house as is, that all sales were final. I should have left, should have walked away from the investment, taken the loss, gone back to Idaho. But I did put everything into this project. My savings, my retirement fund. I couldn't afford to just abandon it. So I stayed, and the activity increased. Every night, multiple figures appeared. I learned to recognize them. The young woman in the nightgown, an old man in pajamas, his face twisted in confusion. A boy, no more than 10, who walked the same path every time, from the kitchen to the front door, over and over, as if trying to escape. They never acknowledged me, never looked at me. They just walked their paths, sometimes through walls, sometimes through furniture, always ending at the embankment. I started researching the victims, found their names in the old articles, found their obituaries. The young woman was named Sarah Yates, 28, a teacher. The old man was Douglas Chen, 73, a retired fisherman. The boy was Marcus Webb, 9 years old, visiting his grandmother. All three had lived on my street. All three had died in the tsunami. And I realized something that made my blood run cold. They weren't haunting the neighborhood randomly. They were retracing their final moments, walking the paths they'd taken when the wave hit, trying to escape, moving through walls that had been destroyed by the water, following routes that no longer existed in the physical world but still existed in whatever dimension they were trapped in. They were stuck in a loop, repeating the night of the tsunami over and over, unaware they were dead, unaware that 33 years had passed. I tried everything, brought in a local priest who performed a blessing, hired a medium who claimed she could help them move on. Nothing worked. The figures kept appearing, kept walking their paths. The priest told me some spirit's done. Do you know they need help? The medium said the trauma was so sudden, so violent, that they might never realize what happened to them. But then things changed. After about 3 weeks in the house, the figures started to notice me. The old man, Douglas, turned his head toward me one night as he passed through the living room. His eyes, cloudy and distant, focused on me for just a second before he continued his path. The next night, the boy Marcus stopped walking. He stood in the middle of the kitchen, staring at me, his mouth moving as if trying to speak. No sound came out. He looked terrified, and Sarah, the young woman, started to deviate from her path. Instead of walking straight through the wall, she paused, turned, looked directly at me. Her expression was desperate, pleading. She reached out her hand, and I see her mouth forming words I couldn't hear. Then she flicker out, disappearing mid-gesture. I realized they were becoming aware. Somehow, my presence was pulling them out of their loop, making them conscious of their situation. And that's when the real horror began. The night it happened, I was working late on the kitchen renovation. Around 1 a.m, I heard a sound I had never heard before. Screaming, all of them at once. The young woman, the old man, the boy, and others I hadn't seen before. All screaming in silent agony, their mouths open wide, their translucent forms flickering violently. They were remembering the wave, the water, the drowning, the moment of death. And they were trapped in it, experiencing it again and again, but now with full awareness. I woken them up, pulled them out of their protective loop, and forced them to confront what had happened to them. Sarah materialized right in front of me, so close I could feel the cold radiating from her form. Her eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw recognition there. Understanding. She knew she was dead. She knew she'd been walking the same path for 33 years. And the look on her face, the absolute despair and rage and grief, made me stagger backward. She reached for me, her hand passing through my chest, and I felt it. Cold beyond anything I'd experienced. Not just temperature, it was the cold of the ocean at 2 a.m. The cold of drowning, the cold of death. My heart stuttered, my lungs seized. For a moment, I was with her, in the water, the wave crushing me, dragging me down, filling my mouth and nose. Then she pulled back, and I collapsed to the floor, gasping. When I looked up, all the figures surrounded me, 8 of them now, all fully aware, all looking at me with that same expression. Not anger, not exactly, something worse, envy. They were dead, trapped, conscious of their state, and I was alive. I left that night and never went back. Walked out with just my truck keys and my wallet. Left all my tools, all my materials, all my investment. I done. Take care. The house can rot. The bank can foreclose. I am not going back to Sitka. I am not going anywhere near that street. But here is the thing that keeps me up at night. Before I left, I looked up the other abandoned houses on that block. Every single one had been bought and abandoned in the past 30 years. Investors like me, contractors, flippers, people who saw a good deal and didn't ask enough questions. And I found online forums, posts from people who tried to renovate those houses, describing the exact same experiences. The footsteps, the water, the figures, the moment when the ghosts became aware. We keep waking them up. Every few years, someone new buys one of those houses and stays long enough to pull the victims out of their protective loop, forcing them to confront their deaths over and over. And I wonder how many times they've been awakened. How many times they remember drowning, only to fall back into their loop when the living person finally leaves. I'm writing this as a warning and as a confession. If you ever find a property that seems too good to be true, especially in a place with a history of disaster, research it thoroughly. Look beyond the property records. Look for the deaths, the trauma, the events that people want to forget. Because some places aren't haunted by evil, they re-haunted by tragedy. And sometimes, the worst thing you can do is wake up the dead. So here is my question for you, the one that haunts me every night. If you could help trapped spirits find peace, but the process meant forcing them to relive their deaths repeatedly, would you do it? Or would you leave them in their loop, unaware and trapped, but at least protected from the full horror of what happened? Let me know in the comments, because I still don't know if leaving was mercy or cowardice. And I'll never know what happened to those figures after I drove away. Story 3. Warm Thieves. The first body we found was smiling. I need you to understand how wrong that was. A frozen corpse, buried to the chest in snowdrift at the base of the Brooks Range. Skin blue-white like marble, ice crystals glittering in the eyebrows and hair. And this peaceful, almost blissful smile on the face, like the person had died experiencing pure joy. That image haunts me every single night, and I need to tell someone what really happened up there before I lose my mind completely. My name is Marcus Webb, and I am a search and rescue coordinator based out of Fairbanks, Alaska. 42 years old, divorced, 2 kids I see every other weekend. Before last month, I pulled 17 people out of the Alaskan wilderness alive and recovered 9 bodies. I'd seen frostbite, hypothermia, avalanche victims, bear attacks. I thought I'd seen everything this frozen wasteland could throw at me. I was wrong. It started with a distress call on March 8th from a geological survey team working in the Brooks Range, about 200 miles north of Fairbanks. 3 researchers studying permafrost degradation, standard operation. They'd been scheduled to check in every 48 hours, but they missed 2 consecutive calls. Their last transmission was garbled, just static and what sounded like wind, though one of our technicians swore he heard someone laughing underneath the noise. We assembled a team of 4. Myself, a younger coordinator named Tyler, and 2 experienced trackers, Ben and Rachel. We flew in by helicopter on a clear, brutally cold morning. Temperature was 30 below zero, and that was without factoring in the wind chill. The sky was that pale Arctic blue that looks beautiful but means the cold is bone deep and dangerous. The survey team's camp was located in a valley between 2 ridges, sheltered from the worst of the wind but completely isolated. Nothing but white wilderness in every direction for 100 miles. When we landed, the first thing I noticed was the silence. Not peaceful quiet, but wrong silence. No wind, no animal sounds, nothing. Just the fading whine of the helicopter blades and then absolute stillness that made my ears ring. The camp looked intact from a distance. 3 expedition tents arranged in a triangle, a equipment shelter, solar panels still functioning. But as we got closer, I saw that the main tent had been torn open from the inside. The fabric hung in frozen strips, and there were dark stains on the snow around the entrance. Not blood, something else, something that looked like ash or soot, except it was ice cold and disappeared when I touched it, leaving my glove damp and smelling faintly of ozone. We found the first body about 50 feet from the camp. Dr. Sarah Chen, according to her ID. 34 years old, geophysicist from UC Berkeley. She was buried up to her chest in snow that had somehow packed solid around her, hard as concrete. Her arms were at her sides, hands open and relaxed. Her eyes were closed, and she was smiling that peaceful, terrible smile. There was no visible cause of death, no wounds, no signs of violence. Her skin was frozen solid, but when we checked her core temperature with our equipment, we got readings that didn't make sense. Negative 40 degrees internally, colder than the ambient air temperature, like something had pulled all the heat out of her body and taken it somewhere else. Tyler threw up when we checked her hands. All 10 fingers had shattered when we tried to move her, breaking off like icicles. The sound they made hitting the snow was delicate, almost musical. I can still hear it when I close my eyes. We found the second body inside the torn tent. Dr. James Rodriguez, 41, climatologist. He was sitting in a camp chair, his laptop still open in front of him, frozen solid. Same peaceful expression, same impossibly low core temperature. His last journal entry was still on the screen, and I photographed it before the battery died. It read, "Temperature drop inside tent inexplicable." Chen went outside to investigate readings. Heard her laughing. She sounds happy. So happy. I want to see what she seen. That was it. No explanation, no description of what was happening. Just those few sentences that made my skin crawl. The third researcher, a graduate student named Michael Park, was missing entirely. We searched the camp and found his personal effects, his clothes, everything. But no sign of the man himself. It was like he simply evaporated. We were preparing to extract the bodies when Rachel called out. She found tracks leading away from the camp, heading northwest into the mountains. Not normal footprints. These were strange, irregular depressions in the snow, each one about the size of a dinner plate, arranged in a pattern that didn't match any animal I knew. And they were cold. I mean really cold. When I put my hand near one of the prints, I could feel the temperature drop, like standing next to an open freezer. The tracks were interspersed with human footprints. Michael Park, his boots, based on the tread pattern. And here is what made my blood freeze. The human prints were light, almost skipping, like he'd been running after something with joy, not fear. Like a child chasing a butterfly on a summer day. We had a decision to make. Extract the bodies we had and call for more support, or follow the tracks and try to find Park while the trail was still fresh. I made the wrong choice. I thought we could handle it. I thought we were prepared. We followed the tracks for almost 3 hours, climbing into the mountains as the temperature dropped even further. The strange depressions in Park, his footprints led us up a narrow valley, the walls closing in on both sides. The silence grew heavier with every step, pressing down on us like a physical weight. Our radio stopped working properly, producing nothing but static and occasional bursts of what sounded like wind chimes. That is when we started feeling it, a pull, like a gentle current in water, tugging us forward. And with it came a sensation of warmth. Not real warmth, not heat that registered on our thermometers or made the ice melt, but a feeling of warmth, a memory of being comfortable, of sitting by a fireplace or lying in bed under heavy blankets. It was seductive, that false warmth. It made us want to keep moving, to follow it to its source. Tyler was the first to notice his breath. We'd been exhaling visible clouds of vapor since we started the search. Standard in extreme cold. But now, his breath was coming out in shapes, geometric patterns that hung in the air for a few seconds before dissolving. Hexagons and spirals, fractals of ice that shouldn't have been possible. We all stopped and watched our own breath, seeing the same thing. The air itself was crystallizing in unnatural ways. We found Michael Park at the head of the valley. He was standing upright in a drift of snow, facing a wall of ice that rose maybe 30 feet high. His arms were spread wide, his head tilted back, and he was frozen solid just like the others. Same peaceful smile, same impossibly low core temperature. But there was something different about him. His eyes were open, and they were filled with ice. Not frozen over, filled, like someone had poured liquid ice into his eye sockets and let it harden. And in that ice, I could see things. Shapes, faces, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, all pressed together, all with that same peaceful expression. All smiling. That is when I saw the things that had killed them. The ice wraiths. That's the only name I can give them. They emerged from the wall of ice like smoke, like heat shimmer, but made of cold instead of warmth. They were vaguely humanoid, maybe 7 feet tall, with long limbs that bent wrong at too many joints. Their bodies seemed to be made of compressed snow and ice crystals, constantly shifting and reforming. Where they moved, the air turned white with frost. But it was their faces that broke something inside me. They didn't have faces. Not really. Just smooth expanses of ice with deep hollows where eyes should be. And in those hollows, I saw warmth. I saw fire and sunlight in summer days. All the heat they'd stolen from their victims, burning in those empty sockets like trapped stars. They noticed us. All three of them turned in unison. And I felt that pull again, stronger now. That seductive promise of warmth. My body temperature was dropping. I could feel it, but it felt good. It felt like relief, like finally putting down a heavy burden I'd been carrying my whole life. Rachel started walking toward them. Just walked right up to one of the ice wraiths with her arms outstretched, like greeting an old friend. I grabbed for her and she shrugged me off with surprising strength. She was laughing, a high, delighted sound that echoed off the ice walls. The wraith reached out with one long, crystalline arm and touched her forehead. Frost spread from the contact point, racing across her skin, covering her face in intricate patterns. She was smiling as she froze, smiling as her eyes filled with ice, smiling as her body temperature plummeted and her heart stopped beating. That snapped me out of whatever trance I'd been in. I grabbed Tyler and Ben and we ran. Just turned and ran back down the valley, our lungs burning with cold air, our equipment clanking and bouncing. Behind us, I heard the sound of ice cracking and reforming, heard that wind chime noise getting louder. They were following us. The next part is confused in my memory. We ran for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. The wraiths stayed just behind us, never quite catching up but never falling behind either. They were playing with us. I realize that now. They could have taken us any time they wanted. But they were enjoying the chase, feeding off our fear and the heat our bodies generated as we ran. Ben stumbled and fell. By the time Tyler and I grabbed him, one of the wraiths was right there, looming over us. Up close, I could see the texture of its body. Thousands of tiny ice crystals packed together, each one containing a fragment of warmth stolen from someone who died smiling. I could see faces in those crystals, hundreds of years of victims. Inuit hunters, early explorers, lost travelers. All of them still alive in some way, trapped in the ice, experiencing eternal warmth while their bodies fed these things. The wraith reached for Ben. I didn't know why I did what I did next. Maybe instinct, maybe desperation. I pulled out my emergency flare and lit it. The bright red flame erupted between us and the creature, and it recoiled. Not from pain, you think. More like disgust. The flare represented real heat, genuine warmth, and it couldn't touch that. Couldn't steal it. The thing retreated into the shadows, and the other two melted back into the ice walls. We made it back to the helicopter. Barely. Ben was hypothermic but alive. Tyler was in shock. I was running on pure adrenaline and terror. We extracted the two bodies we could recover and left Rachel and Michael Park where they were. I filed a report that said we encountered unexplained environmental hazards and recommended the area be closed to all personnel. The official investigation found nothing unusual. Another team went up there 3 weeks later and recovered Rachel and Park's bodies. They reported normal deaths from exposure and hypothermia. The strange tracks, the ice wraiths, the crystalline patterns in their eyes, none of it was in their report. Either they see it, or they were lying. I don't know which possibility scares me more. But here is what keeps me awake at night. Before we left that valley, I looked back one more time. The wall of ice was still there, and I could see shapes moving inside it. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. All those wraiths, ancient things that had been hunting in those mountains for thousands of years. And I understood something that made me want to scream. They were not killers. Not really. They recollectors. They steal warmth because they re-drawn to it, fascinated by it, maybe even loving it in their own way. And the people they take, the ones who die with those peaceful smiles, they were not dead. Not entirely. They re-preserved in the ice, experiencing perfect warmth forever. Their consciousness trapped in an eternal moment of bliss while their bodies feed the things that took them. And the truly terrifying part? Some people would choose that. Some people, faced with the cold and dark and difficulty of real life, would walk into those arms willingly and smile as the ice filled their eyes. I dream about it sometimes. That false warmth, that seductive pull. In my dreams, I'm back in that valley, and the wraiths are calling to me. And I am walking toward them. And I am smiling. They requested a transfer somewhere warm. Arizona, maybe, or New Mexico. Somewhere I'll never see snow again. But I know it won't matter. Those things are still up there in the Brooks Range, waiting in the ice. And sooner or later, someone else will stumble into that valley. Someone else will feel that pull, that promise of eternal warmth. And they'll join the hundreds of others smiling in the ice. So let me ask you something, and I want you to really think about it before you answer in the comments. If you were offered a choice between the struggle and cold of real life and an eternity of perfect, false warmth, which would you choose? Would you keep fighting through the cold, or would you let something take it all away and smile as you froze? Because I think about that question every single day, and I'm terrified that one day I'll know my answer. Story 4. Fourth chair. I found the journal in a cabin near McCarthy, Alaska, and the last entry described how the invisible thing sitting across from the family had finally started breathing their air instead of its own. My name is Daniel Cross. I am a state trooper assigned to remote areas of Alaska. Most of my work involves welfare checks on people who choose to live off the grid. Survivalists, hermits, families who want nothing to do with modern society. Every spring, after the thaw, I visit the cabins scattered across the wilderness to make sure everyone made it through the winter. Most years, everyone is fine. Some years, I find bodies. The Henderson cabin sat 15 miles outside McCarthy, accessible only by snowmobile in winter or bush plane in summer. 3 people had registered to winter there in October 1993. Mark Henderson, his wife Rachel, and their 12-year-old daughter Emma. Experienced outdoors people. They wintered in remote cabins before. They had supplies for 6 months and a satellite phone for emergencies. They never made a single call. I reached the cabin in late April 1994. The snow was melting, revealing a winter's worth of secrets. The cabin looked intact from the outside. Smoke stains on the chimney indicated they kept fires going. No obvious signs of trouble. The door was unlocked. I called out as I entered. Standard procedure. No response. The interior was dark. The windows were covered from the inside with what looked like blankets nailed to the frames. I pulled one down, letting light spill into the room. 3 bodies sat at the dining table. They'd been frozen all winter, preserved by the cold. Mark Henderson sat at the head of the table. Rachel to his right, Emma to his left. They were dressed in their winter clothes. Their hands were folded in front of them. Their eyes were open, and there was a 4th chair, pulled out from the table. Empty, but the wood seat had worn marks, like someone had been sitting there regularly. The snow on the floor had melted around all 4 chairs equally, meaning heat had been present at each position. I radioed for backup and started documenting the scene. That's when I found the journals. 3 of them, 1 for each family member. They'd been keeping daily logs, probably to maintain mental health during the isolation. The entries started normal, routine descriptions of daily life, meals, chores, games, books read. Then, about 6 weeks in, things changed. Mark, his entry from December 3rd. Something strange tonight. We all heard footsteps on the porch. Heavy boots. clear as day. But when I opened the door, nothing there. Fresh snow, no tracks. Rachel, S. entry from December 5th. The footsteps came back. This time they walked around the entire cabin. We heard them pass each window. Mark grabbed the rifle and went outside. He found nothing, but Emma swears she saw a shadow move past the south window. A person-shaped shadow. Emma, S. entry from December 7th. Written in a child's careful handwriting. The thing came inside. We were eating dinner and we all heard the door open. We felt the cold air come in. But the door didn't actually move. It was like the door opened somewhere we couldn't see. Dad checked the lock. Still locked, but something came in. I know it did. We all felt it. The entries continued. The thing, whatever it was, began making itself known in small ways. Footsteps inside the cabin now. The sound of breathing when everyone was holding their breath. Objects moving when no one was looking. A coffee cup sliding across the counter. A book falling off a shelf. Small things, easy to dismiss, except all three journals confirmed the same events happening at the same times. Mark, S. entry from December 15th. It sat at the table with us tonight. We didn't see it, but we all knew it was there. The fourth chair, Emma started setting a place for it. I told her not to, but Rachel said maybe we should. Maybe if we acknowledge it'll leave us alone. I don't know what to think anymore. From that point on, they set a place at the table for the invisible presence. A plate, a cup, silverware. The journals described how the setting would be disturbed after meals. The fork moved, the cup tipped slightly, like something was using them. Rachel, this entry from December 21st. The winter solstice. It is getting colder inside. Even with the fire going strong, we can see our breath now. But only near the fourth chair. The air there is freezing. Mark thinks it's a draft, but there's no draft. The cold moves, it shifts around the cabin, and wherever it goes, we see our breath. We're following it with our eyes now, tracking it by the cold. Emma, S. entry from December 23rd. I saw its breath tonight. Not ours. We were sitting in the dark because the lamp ran out of oil. And I saw breath in the moonlight, coming from the fourth chair. Slow breathing, in and out, in and out. It was watching us. I could feel it watching. The journals became more disturbed. The handwriting shakier. The entries shorter. They stopped trying to rationalize what was happening and just recorded facts. The thing was there. It was real. It was present every moment of every day. Mark, this entry from January 4th. Can T sleep? It stands by our bed now. We see the breath hovering above us in the dark. Sometimes for hours. Just breathing, watching us sleep. Or try to sleep. Rachel is having nightmares. Emma won't sleep alone anymore. She's in our room now. All three of us in one bed. And the thing stands at the foot. Breathing. Rachel. S. entry from January 10th. It touched me today. I was cooking, and I felt pressure on my shoulder. Like a hand, heavy and cold. So cold it burned through my sweater. I turned around. Nothing there, but I felt it. Mark saw the fear on my face. He knew. It's getting bolder. Emma, S. entry from January 15th. It sits closer now. Not at the fourth chair anymore. Right next to us, between us, at dinner tonight. I felt it press against my side, like someone squeezing onto the bench beside me. Mom felt it too. We were being pushed together, squeezed, making room for something we couldn't see. The entries grew desperate. They tried leaving, made it 5 miles before a blizzard forced them back. They tried calling for help. The satellite phone worked, but every time they tried to explain the situation, the line went dead. They tried ignoring it. That made it angry. Mark, S. entry from January 25th. It threw Emma across the room today. We all saw it. She was standing by the window, and suddenly she flew backward like someone shoved her. She hit the wall hard. Bruised ribs. Rachel wanted to leave immediately, walk out if we had to. But the storm outside is too severe. We're trapped with this thing, and it knows we can leave. Rachel, S. entry from February 2nd. It is taking our heat. Not the fire, it's heat. Ours. I watched Mark. His lips turned blue today even though he was standing by the stove. Emma's fingers went white, like frostbite, but from the inside, it was stealing our warmth, feeding on it. We're getting colder from within. Emma's entry from February 8th. Mom says we have to make peace with it. Dad says we have to fight it. I just want it to go away. But it won. It keeps getting stronger. Last night, it breathed on my face. I felt the cold breath on my cheek. Slow, steady, like it was smelling me, tasting me. I couldn't to move. I was so scared I couldn't to even cry. The final entries came in late February. The handwriting was almost illegible. Words scratched onto paper by people who were freezing despite being inside a heated cabin. Mark S. entry from February 23rd. We're not going to make it. I know that now. This thing I sent to do to let us leave. It is feeding on us, draining us. We're getting weaker, slower, colder. Rachel can barely get out of bed. Emma, stop talking. I don't know what it wants. I don't know why it chose us. But it's going to take us. All three of us. Rachel S. entry from February 26th. I understand now. It's lonely. It's been alone here for so long. In this wilderness. In this cold. And it found us. We company. It doesn't want to hurt us. It wants to keep us. Make us stay. Make us like it. Cold. Invisible. Frozen. I can feel myself changing. My thoughts slowing. My body numbing. Maybe it's not so bad. Maybe being cold forever is better than being afraid. Emma, this entry from February 28th. The last entry in any of the journals. It's sitting with us now. We can all see its breath. 3 visible breaths at the table. Ours. And one more. The fourth. It's not breathing the cold air anymore. It's breathing ours. Taking it from our lungs. We're sharing breath with something that shouldn't exist. Dad, his lips are blue. Mom, his eyes are closing. I'm so cold. So tired. But it's okay. The fourth one is family now. It's been here all along. Waiting. And now we'll wait with it. Forever. That was the last entry. Dated February 28th. I found the bodies on April 20th. They'd been dead for 7 weeks. Cause of death was listed as hypothermia, which made sense given the extreme cold. Except the cabin's interior temperature when I found them was 65 degrees. The fire had gone out weeks ago, but the spring thaw had warmed the building significantly. They shouldn't. They have frozen to death in a 65-degree room. But they had. Their core temperatures had dropped to below zero, like they'd been flash frozen from the inside out. The medical examiner couldn't explain it, listed it as an anomaly, suggested they died outside and someone moved them inside, though that made no sense. Who would arrange 3 frozen bodies at a dinner table? I kept the journals. I wasn't supposed to. They were evidence, but I took them anyway because I needed to understand. I read them dozens of times. I tried to rationalize what happened. Cabin fever, hallucinations from carbon monoxide, mass psychosis, but I can explain the 4th chair. I can explain the wear patterns on the seat. I can explain how 3 people froze solid in a warm room. And I can explain what I saw when I visited the cabin one more time the following winter. I went alone, just me. I needed to know if the thing was still there. I sat at the dining table, 3 chairs occupied, 1 empty. I waited as darkness fell and the temperature dropped. I watched my breath become visible in the cold air. And then I saw it, a 4th breath coming from the empty chair. Slow, steady, rhythmic. I ran. I didn't investigate further. Didn't try to communicate. I just ran, got on my snowmobile and rode back to civilization without looking back. The cabin was demolished the following summer. Burned to the ground. Official reason was structural damage. But I know the real reason. Someone else had gone there. Someone else had sat at that table. And they'd seen what I saw. The 4th breath, I done. Patrol that area anymore. I requested a transfer to coastal regions. I tell myself it's because I want a change of scenery. But I know the truth. I am afraid. Afraid that if I go back to that part of Alaska, I'll find another cabin. Another family. Another set of journals describing a presence that joins them for dinner. And I am terrified that one day, I'll be the one writing those journal entries. I'll be the one setting a 4th place at the table. I'll be the one watching my breath mingle with something invisible and cold. Because that thing I sent to gone, it is still out there. In the wilderness, in the isolation, waiting for the next people who choose to spend a winter alone. Waiting to join them, waiting to make them family. I think about the Hendersons often, about how their final entries almost sounded peaceful, like they accepted their fate, like they welcomed the thing into their lives. And I wonder if that is what it does. If it doesn't, to just kill you. If it makes you want to stay, makes the cold feel warm, makes the isolation feel like belonging, makes dying feel like coming home. The question that haunts me most isn't what the thing was. It's why it needed them. Why it chose that family, that cabin, that winter. Was it random, or does it follow some pattern? Does it select its victims? Does it wait for people who are already isolated, already vulnerable, already halfway to disappearing? And the worst question, the one I can't stop asking myself, if I went back to that cabin site, if I built a new structure there, if I spent a winter alone, would it come for me? Would I hear the footsteps? Would I see the fourth breath? Would I set the fourth place at the table? I don't, and I never want to find out. But sometimes, on the coldest nights, when I'm alone in my house and I see my breath in the air even though the heat is on, I wonder if it's already found me. If I brought something back with me from that cabin, something that followed me home, something that's been sitting at my table all along, waiting, breathing, getting ready to make me stay. If you spent a winter alone in the Alaskan wilderness, would you set a fourth place at your table if something asked you to? Would you welcome the invisible presence? Or would you fight it? Tell me in the comments what you would do. Story 5. Deep catch the body in my net had been dead for 40 years, but it was still screaming. I know that sounds impossible, but I saw its mouth locked open in that final moment of terror, jaw frozen wide, and I swear to God I heard the sound coming from somewhere deep in the water below my boat. I am a commercial fisherman working Bristol Bay, Alaska. Name, S. Mike Holloway. 53 years old. Been pulling salmon out of these waters for 28 seasons. I've seen some strange things over the years. Weird weather, freak waves, fish behavior that doesn't make sense. But what I hauled up on March 7th of this year wasn't just strange. It was wrong in a way that made me question everything I thought I knew about these waters. The day started normal enough. Temperature hovering around 15 degrees, snow falling steady, the bay churning gray and angry like it does in late winter. My crew was down to just me and my nephew Danny, 26 years old, working his third season. Most captains don't to fish Bristol Bay in March, but I needed one more good haul to break even for the year. Money was tight, divorce, medical bills, the usual middle-aged disasters that keep you working when you should be resting. We set our nets at dawn in a spot I fished 100 times before, about 12 miles offshore where the depth drops to almost 300 feet. The spot had always been reliable. Good fish, clean pulls, no problems. But when we started hauling that first net around noon, something felt wrong immediately. The winch was straining harder than it should, the motor grinding, cables going taut in a way that meant serious weight. Danny thought we'd snag the bottom, hook some rocks or an old wreck. But the depth finder showed clear water beneath us, nothing that should cause a snag. We kept pulling, and the net finally broke the surface. It was heavy, impossibly heavy, but there were no fish. Just gear, old fishing gear, nets tangled with our net, ancient and rotted, covered in barnacles and seaweed. Hooks and lines that looked like they came from another era, and underneath it all, wrapped in the mesh, was the body. He was wearing oilskins from the 1980s based on the style. His skin was gray-white, preserved by the freezing water, but his features were intact enough to see his expression. Pure terror, eyes wide open, clouded but still somehow focused on something. And that mouth, stretched in a scream that had been frozen for decades. Danny threw up over the side. I stood there staring, my mind trying to process what I was seeing. This wasn't like finding a recent drowning victim. This was a man who, they'd been dead for 40 years, perfectly preserved in the deep cold of Bristol Bay, somehow tangled in our net along with what looked like the remnants of his own fishing gear. I called the Coast Guard immediately. They told us to mark the coordinates, secure the body, and head back to port. They'd meet us there with officials from the state police and the medical examiner. Standard procedure for marine recovery. But as I was securing the body, wrapping it in tarp, I noticed something that made my hands shake. He was holding something. Clutched in his frozen fingers was a waterproof logbook, the old-fashioned kind fishermen used before everything went digital. The leather cover was deteriorated but intact, and inside, visible through the cracked plastic protecting the pages, I could see handwriting. Entries, dates going back to the winter of 1984. I shouldn't have opened it. Should have left it for the authorities, but I needed to know who this man was, what had happened to him. The last entry was dated March 15th, 1984. The handwriting was shaky, desperate. The entry described something impossible. The writer, a captain named Robert Vance, described hauling in a net that was too heavy, filled with old gear and bodies. Bodies of fishermen from ships lost decades before his time. He wrote about how the bodies were still fresh, frozen, preserved. He wrote about how he heard screaming from the water. He wrote about how his crew started disappearing, pulled overboard one by something they couldn't see. And his final words, scrawled barely legibly across the bottom of the page, were a warning. The bay takes what it wants. The bay remembers. The bay feeds. I showed Danny. He wanted to throw the logbook overboard. Pretend we never saw it. But I kept it, tucked it in my jacket. Something told me it was important, that it was meant to be found. When we got back to port, the Coast Guard and state police were waiting. They took the body. They took our statement. They asked about the gear tangled in our net, cataloging everything. But I didn't mention the logbook. I kept that to myself. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept reading through Captain Vance's entries, going back through his final weeks. He'd been fishing the exact same spot I had, 12 miles offshore, over that deep water. He described perfect weather, good catches, normal operations. Then, in early March, things started changing. His nets came up heavier. His catches decreased, and he started finding things mixed in with his gear. Old equipment, damaged boats, and eventually, bodies. The bodies disturbed him most. They weren't recent drowning victims. They were fishermen from ships that had been lost years or decades earlier. Ships he recognized from maritime records and local legends. The FV Northern Star, lost in 1963. The FV Sea Wolf, vanished in 1951. The FV Arctic Rose, which sank in 1942. All of them Bristol Bay fishing vessels. All of them lost without a trace. And now their crews were coming back up, perfectly preserved, still wearing their fishing gear, still locked in expressions of terror. Captain Vance theorized that something in the deep water was collecting them, holding them, preserving them. He wrote about currents that didn't match any charts, about cold spots in the water that registered temperatures far below what should be possible, about sounds echoing up from the depths that his sonar couldn't explain. And he wrote about the feeling of being watched, of something enormous moving beneath his boat, something old and patient and hungry. His crew started having nightmares, vivid dreams about drowning, about being pulled into darkness, about seeing faces in the water looking up at them. Then the accident started. One crew member fell overboard during a routine operation, just slipped on deck and went over the side. They recovered his body 20 minutes later, but he was already frozen solid. His core temperature dropped to impossible levels. Another crew member was found in the hold, tangled in spare net, drowned despite being inside the boat. His lungs full of seawater that tested as impossibly cold and impossibly salt-saturated. The final entries were frantic. Captain Vance knew something was hunting them. Something was taking his crew one by one, and he knew he was next. His last coherent paragraph described looking over the side of his boat and seeing the water filled with bodies. Hundreds of them, thousands, all the fishermen who'd ever been lost in Bristol Bay, standing upright in the water, preserved and frozen, all looking up at his boat, all reaching upward, and something massive moving beneath them, something that used the bodies like lures, drawing in new victims. I spent 3 days researching, found records of the FV Mary Catherine, Captain Vance's boat, lost with all hands in March 1984. No wreckage ever found, no distress call, just vanished, and I found a pattern. Every few years, a fishing boat disappeared in Bristol Bay under mysterious circumstances. Always in winter, always fishing that same deep water 12 miles offshore. Always without a trace. I told Danny we weren't going back out. Told him the season was over, that we'd take the loss. But Danny was young and stubborn and needed the money. He said I was losing it, that reading a dead man whose diary had messed with my head. He said he'd crew for another captain if I wouldn't take him out. So I made a decision I'll regret for the rest of my life. I agreed to one more run, one more net, then we'd be done. We went back out on March 14th. The weather was worse, snow heavy, visibility down to almost nothing. But I knew these waters, I could navigate them blind. We reached the spot just after noon, set our nets in the exact same location where we found Captain Vance's body. And when we started hauling, the winch immediately strained with that same impossible weight. The net came up full. Not with fish, with bodies. Dozens of them, tangled in ancient gear, wrapped in rotted nets, frozen and preserved. Men in oilskins from different eras, 1980s, 1960s, 1940s, some even older, wearing canvas and wool that looked like it came from the early 1900s. All of them with those same expressions. Terror, awareness, that scream locked on their faces. Danny started pulling them out, trying to free our net, and I was screaming at him to stop, to leave it, to cut the net loose and get away. But he didn't. Did you listen? He grabbed one of the bodies to push it back overboard, and its hand moved. I saw it. That frozen hand, dead for decades, closed around Danny's wrist. He fell backward, trying to pull away, and more hands reached up out of the net. Dead hands, frozen hands, moving with purpose. They grabbed Danny, his arms, his jacket, his legs. He was screaming, fighting, but there were too many of them. They pulled him toward the rail, toward the water, and I grabbed him, held on with everything I had. I looked down into the net, into the mass of bodies, and I saw them all moving now. Dozens of dead men, all turning their heads, all focusing on us. And beneath the net, visible in the dark water, were more. Hundreds more, standing upright in the depths, preserved and frozen, all reaching upward. And below them, something massive, something ancient, a shape that didn't fit any form I could recognize, moving through the bodies like a shepherd moving through its flock. I pulled my knife and cut the net cables. The whole mass, bodies and gear and net, dropped back into the water. Danny came free, and we stumbled away from the rail, but when I looked at him, I saw the fear in his eyes. He felt them, those dead hands. He seen what I've seen, and he heard it. That screaming, not from the bodies, but from somewhere deep below, an inhuman sound that resonated up through the water and the boat hull and into our bones. We ran for port, pushed the engines as hard as they could go, and all the way back, I could feel something following us. Something beneath the boat, keeping pace, tracking us. When we finally reached the harbor, we tied up and I swore I'd never go back out. Never fish Bristol Bay again. Never return to those waters. But that night, I had the dream. The same dream Captain Vance described in his log. I was underwater, sinking into darkness. Around me were the bodies, all those preserved fishermen, standing upright in the depths. And below me was the thing that kept them. Massive, ancient, something that had been in Bristol Bay since before humans ever sailed it. Something that fed on fishermen, collecting them, preserving them, using them to lure others into its reach. And in the dream, I understood Bristol Bay wasn't just water and fish and natural currents. There was something else there, something that existed in the deep places, in the cold darkness where light never reached. It had been there for thousands of years, and it was hungry, not for flesh, but for something else, for the moment of terror, for the last desperate seconds of drowning. It fed on that final fear, and it kept its victims frozen and aware, experiencing that moment forever. I woke up screaming, checked on Danny. His room was empty. His truck was gone. The harbor master found his truck at the dock the next morning. His boat was missing. The Coast Guard found it 3 days later, 12 miles offshore, drifting over that deep water. The engines were off. The nets were deployed. And Danny was gone. Just gone. No blood. No signs of struggle. Just missing, like he walked to the rail and stepped off into the water. They searched for a week. Never found him. Listed him as lost at sea. Probable drowning. Case closed. But I know what happened. I know where he is. He is down there with the others, standing upright in the frozen darkness, preserved and aware, experiencing his final moments forever. And one day, someone else will haul him up in their net, perfectly preserved, mouth locked in a scream, and they'll find whatever final message he managed to leave. I sold my boat, left Bristol Bay, moved to Washington State, as far from Alaska as I could get while staying in the fishing industry. But I still dream about it, every night, that massive shape moving through the darkness, those hundreds of preserved bodies standing in the depths, and Danny, his face, frozen in terror, looking up through the black water. The authorities dismissed Captain Vance's log as the ramblings of a man losing his mind to isolation and stress. They never investigated the pattern of disappearances, never acknowledged that something was hunting in those deep waters. And boats still fish that spot, 12 miles offshore, over the deepest part of Bristol Bay. They still haul up strange catches sometimes. Old gear, unidentified debris, and occasionally a body that shouldn't exist, preserved for decades in impossible cold. So what I need to know. What keeps me awake wondering? If something ancient was hunting in the waters where you make your living, something that collected the dead and kept them frozen and aware, would you risk it for one more good catch? Would you gamble your life for money, for pride, for the stubborn refusal to let fear win? Let me know in the comments, because I think about Danny every day. I think about whether I could have stopped him, whether I should have destroyed that log instead of reading it, whether some knowledge is too dangerous to uncover. The bay takes what it wants. The bay remembers. The bay feeds. And I'll never stop wondering if I'm next on its list. Story 6. Breathing tundra. The hole was exhaling when I found it. I could see the warm mist rising from the perfectly circular opening in the snow, smell the strange earthy rot coming up from below, and feel the rhythm of air pushing against my face like something down there was breathing. I am a trapper working Alaska. Its North Slope, the vast frozen wilderness that stretches between the Brooks Range and the Arctic Ocean. Name is Tom Mercer, 49 years old. Been working this territory for 12 years. It's brutal country. Temperatures hit -60 in winter. The sun disappears for months. You're more isolated than astronauts on the space station. But the fur trade pays well if you can handle the solitude and cold. And I've always been good at handling both. I found the first hole on February 3rd, about 40 miles from my cabin in an area I'd trapped 100 times before. It was perfectly circular, maybe 3 feet across, cut straight down through 4 feet of snow and permafrost like someone had used a massive drill. But there were no drill marks, no debris, no equipment tracks. Just a clean hole in the middle of nowhere, exhaling warm, humid air that condensed into mist in the -40-degree temperature. I knelt at the edge and looked down. The hole descended beyond where my flashlight beam could reach, the walls smooth and dark. And I could feel it, a rhythm, air pushing up, then pulling back down, up, then down, like breathing, like something enormous and alive was respiring beneath the frozen ground. The smell coming from the hole was organic, not quite decomposition, not quite plant matter, something in between, something ancient and wrong. My instincts screamed to leave it alone, to mark the location and forget about it. But curiosity is a dangerous thing in isolated places. I dropped a rock down the hole, counting seconds to estimate depth. I counted to 9 before I heard it hit. That meant the hole was at least 400 feet deep, punched straight down through permafrost that should be frozen solid year-round. And when the rock hit bottom, I heard something else. A sound like a sigh, like whatever was down there had felt the impact and responded. The breathing rhythm changed, quickened, the exhalations coming faster and stronger. I backed away from the hole and continued my trap line, trying to convince myself it was some weird geological phenomenon. A volcanic vent maybe, a methane release from thawing permafrost, something explainable. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I disturbed something, that whatever was breathing down there now knew I was here. Over the next week, I found 11 more holes, all perfectly circular, all exactly 3 feet across, all exhaling that same warm, humid air. They formed a pattern across the tundra, arranged in a rough circle about 5 miles in diameter. And at the center of that circle, where logically there should be another hole, was a depression. A massive circular depression in the snow, almost 100 feet across, with all 11 holes positioned around its perimeter like some kind of breathing system. I mapped everything, took photos, documented the locations. Part of me wanted to report it to the university or the geological survey. But another part, the part that had survived 12 years in the Arctic by trusting my instincts, told me to keep quiet. This wasn't the kind of discovery that led to research grants and scientific papers. This was the kind of discovery that led to questions you didn't want answered. The animals started avoiding the area. My trap line, which had always been productive, came up empty. Fox, wolf, caribou, even the ravens, all disappeared from a zone surrounding those holes. The only tracks I found were old, all heading away from the center depression, none heading toward it. Whatever those holes were, the wildlife knew to stay clear. Then the breathing changed. I noticed it on day 9. The rhythm was faster now, the exhalations stronger. The mist rising from the holes was thicker, warmer, like body heat instead of just warm air. And the smell was changing too. becoming more organic, more pungent. Like something down there was waking up. I made the mistake of looking into one of the holes again, this time with a better flashlight and a rope for safety. I secured the rope to my snowmobile and lowered myself to the edge, leaning over to shine my light straight down. The beam penetrated deeper this time, and what I saw made my hands go numb. The hole opened into a cavity, a massive hollow space beneath the permafrost, the walls dark and textured like flesh. And the surface was moving, pulsing, contracting and expanding with that breathing rhythm. I was looking at the inside of something alive, something enormous, something that existed beneath the entire tundra, with these holes serving as breathing vents. I pulled myself back and drove straight to my cabin, spent the night telling myself I'd seen wrong, that it was shadows and ice formations, that my mind was playing tricks after too many months of isolation. But I couldn't sleep. Every few minutes, I'd feel a vibration through the cabin floor, subtle but unmistakable, a rhythm, like something huge was breathing beneath me. The next morning, I found a new hole. This one was only 20 yards from my cabin. It hadn't been there the day before, I was certain. And when I approached it, the breathing was loud enough to hear without leaning close. Deep, resonant inhalations and exhalations, the sound like wind moving through a cave system. I looked inside. The cavity below was closer here, maybe only 50 feet down instead of hundreds. And I could see it clearly now. Flesh, dark, mottled flesh covering the walls of the cavity, pulsing rhythmically. Veins or root-like structures spreading across the surface. And in the center, something that looked like a throat, contracting and expanding, drawing air down and expelling it. I contacted the only other person within 100 miles, a researcher named Sarah Chen stationed at a climate monitoring post about 40 miles east. I described what I found, trying to sound rational and scientific instead of terrified. She was skeptical at first, suggested methane vents or thermal features. But when I sent her my photos and GPS coordinates, her skepticism turned to concern. She arrived 2 days later with equipment, thermal cameras, gas analyzers, core sampling tools, professional and methodical. We started with the hole nearest my cabin. Her thermal camera showed the cavity below registering 98 degrees Fahrenheit. Body temperature. The gas analyzer detected carbon dioxide and oxygen in ratios consistent with respiration. And when we lowered her camera into the hole, the footage showed exactly what I described. Living tissue, pulsing walls, a massive biological structure existing beneath the permafrost. Sarah, a scientific detachment, cracked. She'd been studying Arctic ecosystems for 15 years and had never encountered anything like this. She theorized that we were looking at some kind of massive organism, possibly fungal or bacterial in origin, existing in the liquid water zone beneath the permafrost. But the size was incomprehensible. Based on the distribution of holes, the organism could be miles across. And if it was breathing, if it was metabolically active, that raised questions neither of us wanted to answer. What was it feeding on? How long had it been here? And most terrifying, why was it becoming more active now? We documented everything, set up monitoring equipment, tracked the breathing rhythms, and we discovered a pattern. The breathing was accelerating. Day by day, hour by hour, the rhythm quickened. The exhalations grew stronger, and new holes were appearing, dozens of them, all forming in an expanding circle around that central depression. On day 17, Sarah's equipment detected movement, not the rhythmic pulsing we'd become accustomed to, but lateral movement. Something shifting beneath the tundra, traveling from the outer holes toward the center. The seismic sensors showed it clearly, a massive displacement, like something underground was contracting inward, gathering itself. We drove to the central depression. The snow there had melted completely despite the negative temperatures. The ground beneath was exposed, dark and wet. And it was moving. The entire surface of the depression was rising and falling like the chest of a sleeping giant. But it wasn't sleeping anymore. It was waking up. Cracks appeared in the frozen ground around the depression. Long, radiating fractures that spread outward like spider webs. And from those cracks came more of that warm, humid air. More breathing vents opening up. The thing beneath the tundra was breaking through its containment, reaching toward the surface. Sarah wanted to leave, wanted to get to safety and call in the authorities. But I needed to understand, needed to see what was down there. I approached the edge of the depression, ignoring Sarah's warnings, and looked down into the largest crack. I saw an eye, not a human eye, not an animal eye, something massive and dark and aware, staring up at me from beneath the ground. It blinked, a thick membrane sliding across the surface, and I felt its attention focus on me like a physical weight. It knew I was there. It had known the entire time. Every hole I investigated, every measurement we taken. It had been aware, waiting, growing stronger as it woke from whatever hibernation or dormancy it had been locked in. The ground beneath my feet shifted. Sarah screamed for me to run. I stumbled backward as the entire depression collapsed inward, revealing a cavity hundreds of feet deep. And rising from that cavity was something I still can't fully describe. Massive, organic, covered in that dark, pulsing flesh. Root-like structures spreading outward, digging into the permafrost. And that eye, huge and terrible, focusing on the sky above like it was seeing it for the first time in millennia. We ran for the snowmobile. The ground was breaking apart behind us, more cracks opening, more of the creature pushing toward the surface. We made it back to my cabin and kept going. Didn't stop until we reached Sarah's research post. From there, we called every authority we could think of. The university, the Geological Survey, the Alaska National Guard. They sent a team 3 days later. Scientists, military personnel, emergency responders. But when they reached the site, there was nothing. No holes, no depression. The tundra was smooth and undisturbed, covered in fresh snow. Our equipment was still there, still recording. But the footage showed only empty tundra. The thermal readings were normal. The seismic sensors showed no activity. They concluded we experienced some kind of shared delusion. Isolation psychosis. Too much time alone in extreme conditions causing synchronized hallucinations. They packed up Sarah's research station and pulled her from the field. They recommended I take medical leave, suggested counseling, implied that my testimony was unreliable. But I know what I saw. I know what's beneath the tundra. It is still there, still alive, still breathing. It just pulled back down, retreated to the depths, covered its tracks. Maybe we woke it too early and it wasn't ready to emerge. Maybe it was testing, probing, evaluating the surface world before committing to whatever comes next. I left the North Slope. Couldn't stay there knowing what was underneath. But they'd been monitoring the area using satellite imagery, tracking reports from other trappers and researchers. And they noticed a pattern. Every few weeks, someone reports finding holes. Circular holes in the tundra. Holes that exhale warm air. Holes that weren't there the day before. The reports come from different areas now, spread across the North Slope, like the organism is extending its breathing vents, expanding its territory. Sarah disappeared 4 months ago, left her apartment in Fairbanks one morning and never came back. Search teams found her car abandoned on the Dalton Highway, pointed north toward the Arctic. Her laptop was in the trunk, open to satellite images of the North Slope. She'd been tracking the same pattern I had, documenting the spread of holes across the tundra. I think she went back. I think she needed to see it again, to confirm it was real, to gather evidence that couldn't be dismissed. And I think the organism knew she was coming. I think it has been waiting for us to return, waiting for anyone who knows the truth to come back into its reach. Last week, I found a hole. Not in Alaska, here in Montana, where I'm trying to rebuild my life. A perfectly circular hole in the snow behind my rental house. 3 feet across, exhaling warm, humid air. The breathing rhythm was familiar. The smell was the same. And when I looked down into the darkness, I felt that attention again. That awareness, that certainty that something massive and ancient was watching me from below. It is spreading, not just across the Arctic, but everywhere permafrost exists. Everywhere the ground stays frozen long enough for something to hibernate beneath it. And as the climate warms, as the permafrost thaws, these organisms are waking up. They've been dormant for thousands of years, maybe millions, buried beneath the ice. And now they're rebreathing again. So here is what I need to know. What haunts me every night? If something ancient was waking beneath your feet, something so vast it exists beneath entire landscapes, would you want to know? Or would you prefer to remain ignorant, to dismiss the holes as natural phenomena, to let it wake up in darkness without understanding what is coming? Let me know in the comments, because I think we're running out of time to decide. The tundra is breathing, the permafrost is breaking, and something beneath us is ready to emerge. And when it does, when these organisms finally surface completely, do you think the world is prepared for what that means? Story 7. Intelligence: the bear was using tools when I first understood we were in serious trouble. Not just breaking into things or forcing locks, but actually using a piece of rebar to pry open my reinforced steel door like it had watched 100 YouTube tutorials on breaking and entering. I am a wilderness guide on Kodiak Island, Alaska. 46 years old, been living here for 18 years, and I thought I knew everything about bears. I've seen them fish, seen them problem solve around food storage, even seen them figure out combination locks on dumpsters. But what started happening in the winter of 2004 wasn't the normal bear behavior. It was something else entirely, and by the time the authorities finally admitted there was a problem, 3 people were dead and the rest of us were barricaded in our homes, watching the bears watch us back. It started in early January. I was guiding a small group of wildlife photographers through the island's interior when we came across something that made no sense. A cache of supplies, probably left by hunters, had been broken into. But it wasn't the break-in itself that bothered me. It was how it had been done. The storage container was the kind designed specifically for bear country, with complex latches and reinforced seals. The bears had opened it, but they'd done it carefully, methodically, without the usual brute force damage. The latches had been manipulated in the correct sequence, like someone had taught them how. The photographers wanted pictures of bears, so we tracked the culprits to a clearing about a mile away. What we found there stopped us cold. 7 brown bears, massive Kodiak browns, the largest bears on Earth. But they weren't foraging or sleeping or doing any normal bear activity. They were arranged in a circle, sitting upright, facing each other, just sitting there, watching each other. And in the center of the circle was the food they'd stolen, untouched, as if the food wasn't to the point. We watched from a safe distance for 20 minutes. The bears didn't move, didn't eat, just sat in that formation, occasionally making sounds to each other, low rumbles and huffs that seemed almost like communication. Then, all at once, as if responding to a signal none of us could perceive, they stood up and walked away in different directions. Each bear took a portion of the stolen food and headed off alone. It felt coordinated, planned. I reported it to the Alaska Department of Fish and Game. The officer I spoke with was dismissive, said bears sometimes exhibit unusual behavior in winter, that food scarcity makes them desperate and creative. He didn't take it seriously. Nobody did, not until the attack started. The first death was Martha Simmons, a 72-year-old woman who lived alone on the outskirts of the main town. Her cabin was found torn apart, but not in the way bears usually destroy things. They targeted specific entry points, the weakest spots in her structure, and they worked together. The tracks in the snow told the story. At least 4 different bears, approaching from different angles, hitting the cabin simultaneously. They overwhelmed her defenses in minutes. The authorities called it a tragic accident, unusually aggressive behavior brought on by a harsh winter. But I went to the scene after the investigators left, and I saw things they either missed or chose to ignore. The bears had disabled her electric fence first, pushing a tree onto the power line to cut the current. Then they jammed her bear alarm with mud and snow, silencing it. These weren't the accidents or lucky breaks. These were tactics. 2 weeks later, another death. Tom Greenway, a commercial fisherman who kept a cabin for winter storage. The bears had waited until he was alone, cut off his escape routes, and cornered him. The autopsy showed he tried to use bear spray. It hadn't worked. The bears had approached from upwind, avoiding the spray pattern, something they shouldn't have known to do. I started keeping detailed notes, documenting everything I saw. The bears were changing. Their behavior was becoming more sophisticated by the day. I watched them test different homes and cabins, probing defenses, learning what worked and what didn't. When they found an effective deterrent at one property, they avoided that same deterrent at others. They were learning collectively, sharing information somehow. The island has about 13,000 people during winter, most clustered in the main town. But hundreds live in isolated cabins and remote properties. And the bears were targeting those outlying homes systematically, one by one, as if working through a list. They approach at night, usually between 2 and 4 in the morning when people were deepest in sleep. They test doors and windows quietly. If they encountered resistance, they withdraw and move to the next target. If they found weakness, they exploit it. I reinforced my cabin obsessively. Steel shutters on the windows, reinforced doors, multiple backup power systems for my electric fence, motion sensors, floodlights, everything I could think of. Other people started doing the same. The hardware store in town sold out of security equipment. People who lived peacefully alongside bears for decades were suddenly fortifying their homes like they were preparing for siege. The authorities finally acknowledged the problem in mid-February after the third death. They brought in wildlife experts from the mainland, biologists who specialized in bear behavior. They set up monitoring stations, tagged several bears with GPS collars, and started 24-hour observation. What they found terrified them. The bears were meeting regularly, gathering in groups at specific locations, always at night, always in the remote interior where humans rarely went. The GPS data showed clear patterns. Individual bears would travel miles to attend these gatherings, then disperse to different areas afterward. And the attacks on human habitations increased in coordination and sophistication after each gathering. One of the biologists, a woman named Dr. Sarah Chen, who studied bear behavior for 20 years, told me privately that she had never seen anything like it. She said the bears were exhibiting problem-solving abilities usually only seen in great apes or dolphins. They were using observational learning, planning, cooperation, and even what appeared to be tactical thinking. She couldn't explain it. No one could. Then came the night they attacked my cabin. I was ready, or I thought I was. My security system alerted me at 2:37 in the morning. 6 bears on my property, approaching from 3 different directions. I watched them on my security cameras, and what I saw made my hands shake. They brought tools, not just found objects they were using opportunistically, but tools they clearly transported to my property. Branches shaped and sharpened to specific lengths, rocks of particular sizes and weights, and that piece of rebar, probably taken from a construction site miles away, perfect for prying. I activated everything: electric fence, floodlights, alarm sirens, even fired warning shots from my rifle. The bears didn't panic or flee like they should have. They retreated just beyond the fence line and waited, watching my cabin, studying my defenses. I could see their eyes reflecting in the floodlights, all those eyes, fixed on my home with an intensity that felt almost human. They waited for 45 minutes. Then, systematically, they began disabling my defenses. One bear pushed a tree onto my power line, cutting electricity to the fence. Another bear threw snow and ice onto my motion sensors, blinding them. A third bear used that rebar to pry at my shutters, testing their strength. They worked together with terrifying coordination, each bear handling a specific task, like a military unit executing a plan. I was on the phone with emergency services, screaming for help. When I heard the sound, I'll never forget. My reinforced door being pried open, the metal groaning, the lock mechanism failing. I grabbed my rifle and fired through the door. The bear on the other side made a sound, not pain exactly, more like surprise. The prying stopped, but the door was damaged now, the frame bent, the seal broken. The helicopter arrived 20 minutes later, a wildlife services team responding to what they now classified as an emergency situation. The spotlight from above scattered the bears, sent them retreating into the forest. But they didn't run in panic. They withdrew in order, still coordinated, still controlled. The last bear to leave stopped at the tree line and looked back at my cabin, at me, watching from the broken doorway. And in that moment, I saw something in its eyes that shouldn't be there. Recognition, understanding, intent. The authorities evacuated the most isolated residents, relocated families to the main town, set up a command center to coordinate response. But the problem was clear. There are over 3,000 brown bears on Kodiak Island. If even a fraction of them were exhibiting this intelligent, coordinated behavior, there was no way to control the situation. Dr. Chen spent weeks studying the tagged bears, analyzing their patterns, trying to understand what was happening. Her final report, the one that got her pulled from the project and quietly reassigned, concluded that the bears weren't just learning. They were being taught. Something or someone was teaching them, training them. The pattern of behavior spread too quickly to be simple observational learning. New behaviors appeared simultaneously in bears across the island, bears that had no contact with each other, as if they were all receiving the same instructions from a central source. The official explanation, the one the authorities released to the public, blamed unusual environmental stressors. climate change affecting food sources, increased human encroachment, natural adaptation to changing conditions. They said the coordinated behavior was coincidental, that we were seeing patterns where none existed, that the attacks were tragic but explainable within normal parameters of bear behavior. But I know what I saw. I know what happened to my door. I know those bears were using tools, working together, planning their attacks with intelligence that shouldn't be possible. And I know the incidents didn't stop. They just stopped being reported. The authorities clamped down on information, stopped releasing details about encounters, made it clear that spreading panic was unacceptable. I left Kodiak in March of 2004. Couldn't stay after what I'd seen. Couldn't sleep knowing those bears were still out there, still learning, still gathering. I moved to Juneau, started guiding in different territory, tried to forget. But 3 weeks ago, I saw something that brought it all back. I was leading a group through the wilderness outside Juneau when we came across a clearing. And in that clearing, arranged in a circle, sitting upright and facing each other, were 9 black bears. Just sitting, watching each other, making those same low rumbling sounds. And when they finished, when they stood up and dispersed, each bear headed in a different direction with purpose. I started documenting again, keeping notes, watching, because I think whatever happened on Kodiak in 2004 wasn't an isolated incident. I think it's spreading. The intelligent behavior, the coordination, the tool use. They found reports from other parts of Alaska, buried in local news stories and wildlife incident reports. Bears acting strangely, bears working together, bears solving problems they shouldn't be able to solve. And they noticed something else. The gatherings are getting larger, more bears attending, meeting more frequently. Last week, I tracked one of these gatherings to a remote valley and watched from a safe distance with binoculars. 23 bears, arranged in concentric circles, all facing inward. All completely still, all silent. For 2 hours, they just sat there. And when they finally moved, they moved as one, standing simultaneously, dispersing in organized groups. Do you know what the replanning? Do you know what intelligence is guiding them or how it is possible? But I know that the relationship between humans and bears in Alaska is changing. We're not the dominant species anymore. We're not the ones in control. And the bears know it. The authorities want to listen. They label me as paranoid, unreliable, damaged by my experiences on Kodiak. But I have documentation now, photographs, video footage, GPS tracking data I collected independently. And I'm not the only one noticing. There's a network of guides, hunters, and researchers across Alaska who've seen similar things, who know something fundamental has changed. We share information quietly, carefully, knowing that official channels will dismiss or bury anything we report. So I'm putting this out there as a warning and a record. If you live in bear country, especially in Alaska, pay attention to the animals around you. Watch for unusual behavior. Watch for coordination. Watch for intelligence that shouldn't be there. Because I think we're in the early stages of something unprecedented. Something that is going to redefine what it means to coexist with wildlife. And here is the question that keeps me awake every night. The one I need you to think about. If another species suddenly developed intelligence comparable to ours, if they started organizing and planning and using tools, would we recognize it in time? Or would we dismiss it as impossible, as paranoia, as misinterpretation, right up until the moment we lost control? Let me know in the comments what you think, because I believe that moment is coming sooner than anyone wants to admit. The bears are learning, the bears are planning, and we're running out of time to figure out what comes next. Story 8. What the ice remembers. The ice core was screaming at me in a language that hadn't been spoken for 12,000 years. And I understood every word it said. My name is Dr. James Sullivan. I am a glaciologist, which means I study ice for a living. Sounds boring, right? Most days it is. You drill into glaciers, pull out cylinders of compacted snow and ice, analyze them for climate data. The ice is like a history book. Each layer tells you about temperature, precipitation, atmospheric composition from when that snow first fell. Some of the cores I've worked with are over 1 million years old. But nothing prepared me for what we found in the permafrost outside Prudhoe Bay, Alaska. I was part of a research team studying the effects of climate change on Arctic permafrost. As the ground thaws, it releases methane, which accelerates warming. Standard environmental science. We set up a drilling station about 40 miles inland from the coast. Remote location. Nothing around but tundra and a sky that stayed dark 20 hours a day in February. The core came up on our 6th day of drilling. We'd gone down 200 feet, which put us in permafrost that had been frozen solid for at least 15,000 years. Older than human civilization. Older than agriculture. From a time when woolly mammoths still walked across Alaska and the Bering Land Bridge connected Asia to North America. The core looked normal at first. Clear ice with trapped air bubbles and sediment layers. We brought it into our heated lab tent to begin analysis. That is when it started making sounds. Not melting sounds. Not cracking sounds. Vibrations that resolved into frequencies my ears could process as something almost like speech. Deep, resonant, coming from inside the ice itself. My colleague Dr. Rebecca Torres noticed it first. She was holding a stethoscope against the core, listening for air bubble movements. Her face went white. She pulled the stethoscope out and handed it to me without saying anything. Just pointed at the ice. I listened. At first, just low rumbling, like distant thunder or a truck engine. But then patterns emerged, rhythms, cadences. The sound would rise and fall in ways that felt intentional, structured, like language. We recorded it, ran the audio through spectral analysis software. The frequencies were concentrated in a narrow band between 20 and 60 hertz. Barely audible to human ears, but definitely there. And the patterns weren't too random. They repeated, varied, responded to each other like a conversation. The ice was talking. We thought it was a hoax at first. Maybe someone had planted something in the drill site. But we examined the core microscopically. No foreign objects. No drill contamination. Just pure ice and trapped air bubbles from 15,000 years ago. Yet somehow, when we warmed it even slightly, it produced sounds that resembled human speech. Dr. Torres suggested we try translation software. Feed the audio into programs designed to decode unknown languages. We used systems that could identify patterns in dolphin calls and whale songs. Systems built on mathematical models of how communication works at its most fundamental level. The software found structure immediately. Syntax, grammar, recurring patterns that functioned like words or phrases. After 6 hours of processing, it gave us a confidence rating of 73% that the sounds represented actual language. Then it started generating translations. The first message came through garbled, partial words, fragments, but enough to make my hands shake. Beneath, warning, death, stay. Beneath, we ran the analysis again. Different algorithms, different parameters. The message refined. What lies beneath must stay beneath. Do not dig. Do not thaw. Death remembers. Death is patient. Death is hungry. I should have stopped right there. Should have packed up the equipment and abandoned the site. But I am a scientist. I needed to understand. We drilled deeper. The second core came up from 300 feet. This one was older, 20,000 years. When we brought it into the tent and let it begin warming, the sound started immediately. Louder, more urgent. The translation came faster this time. They are sleeping. Do not wake them. They came before ice. They will come after ice. They are older than stone, older than water. They are hunger with no body, voice with no mouth. They speak through the frozen. We gave ourselves to warn you. Do not dig deeper. That phrase stuck with me. We gave ourselves to warn you. What did that mean? Who were the people who froze themselves into the permafrost to leave messages for the future? Dr. Torres wanted to stop. She said whatever we found was beyond our expertise. We should contact anthropologists, linguists, maybe even the military. But I convinced her to pull one more core, the deepest one, 400 feet down, ice from the height of the last glacial maximum, 25,000 years old. We brought it up at dusk. The core was different, darker. The ice wasn't clear. It had a cloudy, almost oily quality. And the moment we set it on the examination table, before it even began to thaw, it started screaming. Not the low rumbling of the other cores. This was high-pitched, piercing, a sound that made my teeth ache and my vision blur. Dr. Torres covered her ears and backed away. I tried to hold my ground, but the sound intensified. The translation software crashed, rebooted, started generating text so fast I couldn't read it. Then the ice core cracked. Not from thawing, it just split down the middle with a sound like a gunshot. And something came out. Not physically, there was nothing to see, but the temperature in the tent dropped 30 degrees in seconds. Our breath became visible fog. Frost formed on every surface. The computer screens flickered and died. The lights dimmed to almost nothing. And I felt it, a presence, something aware, something angry. It moved through the tent like wind, but there was no breeze. I felt it pass through me. Cold beyond cold, cold that burned, cold that felt alive and malicious. Dr. Torres screamed. She was staring at her hands. They were turning gray. The color was draining from her skin like water draining from a cloth. I grabbed her and pulled her toward the exit. We stumbled out into the Arctic night. The cold outside felt warm compared to what was in that tent. We ran toward the main camp, a cluster of heated buildings about 100 yards away. Behind us, the lab tent collapsed. The frame bent inward like something was crushing it from the inside. When we reached the main camp, Dr. Torres was barely conscious. Her skin was pale, her lips were blue, severe hypothermia, but we'd only been outside for 90 seconds. And she was wearing full Arctic gear. This shouldn't have been possible. We got her into the medical bay. The camp doctor worked on her for 2 hours. Warming blankets, heated IV fluids. She survived, but she never spoke again. Not a word. She just stared at nothing with eyes that looked through everything and saw something else. Something that had broken her in a way flesh couldn't heal. I tried to explain what happened to the rest of the team. They were skeptical, thought maybe there'd been a gas leak in the tent. Carbon monoxide or methane, something that caused hallucinations. They sent 2 people to investigate the collapsed tent. They never came back. We found them the next morning, frozen solid, standing upright about 50 feet from the tent, positioned in a perfect line like they'd been walking somewhere and simply stopped. Their eyes were open, their mouths were open, and when we moved them, we heard sounds coming from inside their bodies. That same low-frequency rumbling we heard from the ice cores. They'd become part of whatever had been trapped in the permafrost. The camp evacuated. 14 people loaded into helicopters and left within 6 hours. I wanted to go with them, but I needed to understand. I needed to know what we released. So I stayed behind with 2 volunteers. Security personnel, ex-military, men who weren't afraid of much. That was a mistake. The first night alone, the sound started coming from underground, all around the camp. That deep rumbling, that almost speech. We could feel it through the floors of the buildings. Vibrations that made our bones ache. The translation software was gone with the collapsed tent, but I didn't need it anymore. I could understand the sounds directly now, like my brain had learned the language just from exposure. The messages were simple. Get out, leave, this place is forbidden. What sleeps here must not wake fully. You've opened the first seal. There are 7 seals, 7 layers of ice holding 7 layers of hunger. Go before you open another. But I couldn't leave. I was obsessed. I needed to know what was down there. What ancient civilization had buried itself in ice to warn future generations? What could be so dangerous that people would sacrifice themselves to leave messages in frozen ground? I went back to the drill site the second night. Alone. I told the security personnel I was just checking the equipment. They didn't. They tried to stop me. Later, I learned they both left the camp that night. Just walked out into the darkness and kept walking until they froze. Smart men, they understood better than I did. The collapsed lab tent was covered in frost. The drill equipment was still there, frozen in place. I pulled out a hand corer, a simple manual tool. I was going to take one more sample, just one, from deeper than we'd gone before. 500 feet, 600, as deep as I could reach. I drilled for 3 hours. Manual labor in 40 below cold. My muscles screamed, my lungs burned. But I kept going. I was crying by the end. Not from pain, from fear, from knowing I was making a terrible mistake, from being unable to stop myself. The core came up black. Not dark, black, like I drilled into a void. And it was warm. In 40 below temperatures, this cylinder of ice was warm to the touch. I carried it back to the main camp and locked myself in the medical bay with it. When I set it down, it didn't make sounds. It made images, directly in my mind. No translation needed, pure understanding. I saw the world before ice. Alaska was warm, green, full of life, and something else lived here. Not animals, not plants, something that existed in a way biology couldn't explain. They were consciousness without form, hunger without body. They fed on life, not flesh, life itself, the force that makes things alive. They consumed it, and where they fed, everything died and could never live again. The early humans who came across the Bering Land Bridge encountered them. Entire tribes vanished. The survivors tried to fight, but you can fight something that has no physical form. So they made a different choice. They made a prison. They called the ice. I don't know how. The images showed them chanting, bleeding onto the ground, sacrificing themselves by hundreds. And the ice came. Glaciers that shouldn't have formed. Permafrost that shouldn't have frozen. A sudden deep freeze that trapped the things beneath layers and layers of frozen ground. The humans knew the ice would eventually melt. Climate changes, cycles. Nothing stays frozen forever. So they stayed with the ice. Volunteers who let themselves freeze into the permafrost at different depths. Warnings at every level. Messages to future humans. Do not dig. Do not thaw. Keep the seals intact. We broken 3 seals. 3 layers of ice. 3 layers of protection. And with each broken seal, the things beneath grew stronger. Closer to freedom. 4 more seals remained between them and the surface. 400 feet of frozen ground keeping ancient hunger trapped in place. The images showed me what would happen if all 7 seals broke. The things would emerge. Not physically. They would spread like a wave across the surface of the earth. Invisible, unstoppable, feeding on the life force of everything they touched. Plants would wither. Animals would collapse. Humans would simply stop. Not dead, emptied. Shells that still breathed but contained nothing that could be called alive. The black core began to crack. I ran. I didn't T-pack. Didn't take anything. Just ran to the helicopter pad and got in the one remaining aircraft. I'd never flown a helicopter before, but I figured it out through pure terror. I got it in the air and flew south toward Prudhoe Bay, toward civilization, toward anywhere but that camp. Behind me, the drill site lit up. Not with fire, with darkness, a column of black rising from the permafrost. Not smoke, something else, absence, a hole in reality that spread outward in all directions. I radioed ahead, told them to evacuate Prudhoe Bay, to get everyone away from the north slope. They thought I was having a breakdown. By the time they understood I was serious, it was too late. The darkness spread for 6 hours before it stopped. It covered an area roughly 15 miles across. Everything inside that zone died. Not decomposed, just emptied. Buildings stood intact. Vehicles sat unmoved. But every plant, every microbe, every living thing ceased to exist. The ground itself became sterile, dead in a way that made it impossible for life to return. The official explanation was a chemical spill. Toxic material from oil drilling operations. The area was sealed. No one allowed in or out. But I know the truth. 4 seals remain. 400 feet of permafrost between the surface and complete catastrophe. And the permafrost is melting. Every year, another few inches thaw. Every year, the seals grow weaker. I'm telling you this because it's going to happen again. Someone else will drill. Someone else will thaw the ice. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe in 10 years. But it's inevitable. And when the last seal breaks, when the ancient hunger finally reaches the surface, there won't be anywhere to run. The ice was trying to warn us. The people who sacrificed themselves thousands of years ago were trying to save us. And we didn't listen. We never listen. I think about those images every day. About what is waiting beneath Alaska, beneath Siberia, beneath Antarctica, wherever permafrost holds ancient ice. I wonder how many other warnings are frozen down there. How many other seals protect us from things we don? They have names for. And I wonder if the people who made those sacrifices knew we'd ignore them. If they froze themselves into the ground knowing it would be futile. Hoping anyway, because hope is what humans do. We hope even when hope is stupid. We warn even when we know the warning wants to be heeded. The black core is still in the medical bay. I sealed the room before I left. It is still there. Still warm. Still cracking slowly. Still releasing whatever was trapped inside it. I don't know if it was getting out. I don't know if the military team that eventually secured the site was smart enough to refreeze it. I don't know if refreezing would even help. What I know is this. The ice remembers. It holds memories of things older than human history. And some of those memories should stay frozen. Some warnings should be heeded. Some doors should never be opened. If you ever hear about Arctic drilling operations releasing strange gases, if you hear about unexplained deaths in northern Alaska, if you see news reports about areas becoming mysteriously sterile, no, the seals are breaking, the ice is melting, and what was buried is coming back. Would you have kept drilling? Would you have turned back at the first warning? Or would curiosity have driven you to break just one more seal, to learn just one more secret? Tell me in the comments what you would have done. Story 9. Shadow that remembered my shadow moved without me yesterday. I know how that sounds. Trust me, I do. But I need to tell someone what is happening in Fairbanks right now before I lose my mind completely. or before my shadow decides it doesn't need me anymore. My name is Robert Hayes. I'm 51 years old, work as an accountant for a mining company here in Alaska, and until 3 days ago, I thought I understood how the world worked. I was wrong. It started on March 10th, around 2 in the afternoon. I was walking to my car after a late lunch at a diner downtown. The sun was low on the horizon, that weak winter sunlight that barely counts as daylight up here. My shadow stretched out in front of me on the snow-covered parking lot, long and distorted the way shadows get in the late afternoon. Except it was moving wrong. I'd taken a step forward, but my shadow moved to the left. Just slightly, maybe 6 inches off from where it should have been. I stopped walking and stared at it. The shadow stopped too, but it lagged behind by maybe half a second. Like watching a video with the audio slightly out of sync. I waved my hand. The shadow waved back, but the motion was delayed and somehow uncertain. Like it was copying me from memory rather than reflecting my actual movement. I looked around to see if anyone else had noticed. The parking lot was empty except for an older woman loading groceries into her truck. Her shadow was doing the same thing. I could see it clearly. She'd close her truck door, and a moment later, her shadow would repeat the action. But not exactly the same. The shadow's movements were slightly different, like it was improvising based on a general idea of what it should be doing. The woman noticed me staring and gave me a look that said, "Mind your own business." I got in my car and drove home, trying to convince myself I imagined it. Maybe I was tired. Maybe the strange light up here was playing tricks on my eyes. Maybe I needed to get my vision checked. But I hadn't imagined it. When I got home and walked from my garage to my house, my shadow followed me across the driveway with that same delayed, uncertain quality. And it wasn't just mimicking my current movements anymore. As I walked toward my front door, my shadow turned and walked toward the mailbox. Then it stopped, waited, and caught up with me, like it had forgotten what I was doing and had to correct itself. I went inside and closed all the blinds. If I couldn't see my shadow, I could pretend this wasn't happening. I spent the evening trying to work on some spreadsheets for the office, but I couldn't concentrate. Every time I moved, I was aware of my shadow on the wall, cast by the lamp beside my desk. And it wasn't quite right. The angle was wrong. The proportions were off. And sometimes, when I wasn't looking directly at it, I'd catch it moving in my peripheral vision. Gestures I hadn't made. Motions I couldn't explain. Around midnight, I heard my neighbor, his dog, start barking. It went on for 20 minutes straight, that panicked, terrified barking that dogs do when they see something that shouldn't exist. I looked out my window and saw my neighbor Bill standing in his driveway, staring at the side of his house. His shadow was on the wall, cast by his porch light. But Bill wasn't moving. He was standing completely still, looking at his shadow as it walked back and forth along the wall, pacing like a caged animal. I grabbed my phone and called him. He answered on the first ring, his voice tight with fear. He told me his shadow had been acting strange all evening, moving independently, doing things he hadn't done, and now was repeating movements from yesterday. He paced in his driveway yesterday afternoon while on a phone call with his daughter. His shadow was repeating that exact pacing pattern now, 24 hours later, moving back and forth along the wall while Bill stood frozen, watching his own actions played back to him. He asked if my shadow was doing the same thing. I looked at the wall in my living room where my shadow should have been cast by the lamp. It was there, but it wasn't mimicking my current pose. Instead, it was sitting at a desk, hands moving like it was typing, which is exactly what I'd been doing at this time yesterday. Working late on a financial report, I told Bill I was seeing the same thing. We stayed on the phone for another hour, both of us watching our shadows replay the previous day's activities. Bill's shadow eventually went inside his house on the wall, moving through the painted wood like it was passing through a doorway. Mine stood up from the invisible desk and walked toward my bedroom, even though I was standing in the living room. The next morning, the whole town was talking about it. Social media was flooded with videos and photos. People as shadows moving independently, repeating yesterday's activities, sometimes doing things their owners couldn't remember doing. The news called it an atmospheric phenomenon, something to do with the aurora borealis and unusual magnetic field fluctuations. They said it would pass in a few days and there was no cause for alarm. But they were wrong. It wasn't just an atmospheric phenomenon. The shadows were learning. becoming more independent, and they were remembering things we forgotten, things we tried to forget. I went to work that day because I didn't know what else to do. The office was chaos. Half the staff had called in sick, too freaked out to leave their homes. The ones who showed up kept watching their shadows nervously, jumping at every unexpected movement. My shadow sat at my desk and went through the motions of working, typing, and shuffling papers that didn't exist. But its movements weren't just from yesterday anymore. I saw it do things I hadn't done in weeks, months, years. Around noon, I watched my shadow pick up a phone that wasn't there and have a conversation. And I remembered 3 years ago, I called my ex-wife from this desk. We had a fight, one of our last before the divorce was finalized. I said things I regretted, things I spent 3 years trying to forget. And now my shadow was acting it out again, showing everyone in the office my anger and my cruelty, preserved perfectly in whatever strange memory shadows have. Other people were experiencing the same thing. Cheryl from accounting watched her shadow have a breakdown in her cubicle, crying and gasping, reenacting a panic attack she had 2 years ago that she never told anyone about. Marcus from operations saw his shadow sneak something into a desk drawer, repeating the time he stolen petty cash from the office and never gotten caught. Every secret, every forgotten moment, every action we'd rather leave buried, our shadows were bringing them back into the light. By the second day, the shadows started grouping together. When nobody was in a room, the shadows would congregate on walls, huddling close like they were having conversations. I saw it first in a conference room I passed. The lights were off, but through the glass walls I could see dozens of shadows pressed together on the far wall, their forms overlapping and merging. They moved in synchronized patterns, like they were sharing information or coordinating something. I opened the door and turned on the lights. The shadows scattered instantly, racing across the walls and disappearing into corners and under furniture. All except one. It stood in the center of the wall, tall and dark and more solid than a shadow should be. I couldn't tell whose shadow it was. It had no owner present. It was just there, existing independently, watching me with whatever sense shadows use to perceive the world. Then it spoke, not with sound exactly, but I heard it anyway. Inside my head, like a thought that wasn't my own. It showed me a memory. Not mine, someone else's, a man I didn't, doing something terrible in a basement somewhere. The shadow had brought this memory from its owner and was now showing it to me. A secret that should have stayed hidden, exposed by the thing that had followed this man around for his entire life, silently recording everything. I ran from that room and didn't go back, but I couldn't escape the implications. If shadows could share memories, if they could communicate with each other and with us, then nothing was private anymore. Every action we'd ever taken in the light, every moment a shadow had been present, it was all recorded somehow, stored in whatever dimension shadows inhabit when they read not being cast. And now, for some reason, all of those memories were bleeding through. That night, the shadows started whispering. You could hear them if you listened carefully in quiet rooms. A soft susurrus of sound, like wind through grass, but carrying fragments of words. Secrets, confessions, things people had said when they thought no one was listening, but their shadows had been there. The shadows remembered everything. I sat in my dark living room, trying to avoid casting a shadow at all. But even in near darkness, there was enough ambient light from street lamps in neighboring houses to create faint shadows on my walls. And those shadows were moving, gathering in the corners, whispering to each other in that terrible soft voice. I caught fragments of what they were saying, my own words, spoken years ago, things I said to my wife during our marriage, lies I told, promises I broken. The shadows were cataloging my failures, reviewing them, judging me with the patient attention of something that has nothing but time. On the third day, people started disappearing. Not many at first, just a few reports of people who hadn't shown up for work or answered their phones. But the numbers grew quickly. By afternoon, there were dozens of missing person reports filed. The pattern was always the same. Someone was last seen at home or at work, somewhere familiar. Their car would still be in the driveway. Their belongings would still be in place. But the person was gone. No signs of struggle. No indication of where they'd gone. Just empty rooms and, on the walls, shadows that moved and whispered without owners to cast them. The authorities tried to keep people calm, but panic was setting in. The prevailing theory was that people were hiding, unable to cope with having their shadows expose their secrets. But I knew it was something worse. The shadows weren't just revealing our pasts. They were taking people, pulling them into whatever dark space shadows inhabit. Or maybe the shadows were replacing them, becoming solid enough to walk around without needing someone to cast them. I didn't. Do you know which possibility was more terrifying? I saw it happen to Bill, my neighbor. I was looking out my window when his shadow detached completely from his body. It didn't just move independently. It pulled away like it was peeling off his skin. Bill screamed, a sound I'll never forget, as his shadow stood up separate from him and turned to face him. For a moment, they stood there, man and shadow, looking at each other. Then Bill collapsed, just fell to the ground like all his strings had been cut. And his shadow walked away, moving down the street with purpose, heading toward downtown where I'd seen other shadows gathering. I ran outside to check on Bill. He was alive but unconscious, his breathing shallow. I called an ambulance and stayed with him until they arrived. When the EMTs loaded him onto the stretcher, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. Bill didn't have a shadow anymore. Even under the bright emergency lights, there was no shadow cast by his body. It was gone, taken. And Bill looked diminished somehow, like losing his shadow had removed something essential from him. The phenomenon ended on the fourth day, just stopped as suddenly as it had started. Shadows went back to normal, following their owners, mimicking current movements with perfect accuracy. The atmospheric disturbances the scientists had measured returned to baseline. The news declared the crisis over and encouraged people to return to their normal routines. But nothing was normal. Hundreds of people across Fairbanks were still missing. Hundreds more, like Bill, were in hospitals, comatose or unresponsive, their shadows gone. And those of us who still had our shadows were changed. We'd seen too much, learned too much about what follows us through our lives, silently recording every action, every word, every secret we think we've hidden. I watch my shadow constantly now, looking for any sign that it might be gaining independence again, that it might decide to share my memories with others or pull away from me entirely. Sometimes I see it hesitate before following my movements. Sometimes I catch it looking in a different direction than I'm facing, like it is interested in something I can to see. And I wonder how much of me is in my shadow and how much of my shadow is in me. If it's just a reflection of my physical form or if it is something more. A record of my entire existence. A dark mirror that knows everything I've ever done. The scientists still don't have a real explanation for what happened. They talk about magnetic anomalies and unusual solar activity and atmospheric conditions unique to high latitudes. But they can explain the memories. They can explain the whispering. They can explain where the missing people went or how to bring them back. I found something yesterday that I haven't told anyone about yet. I was going through old family photos and found one from my childhood. A picture of me and my father taken when I was 8 years old. We were standing in our backyard in summer sunlight, and we were both casting long shadows across the grass. But in the photo, my shadow isn't mimicking my pose. It is reaching toward my father, his shadow, which is reaching back. Like they were holding hands even though my father and I are standing 3 feet apart. Like our shadows had a relationship independent of us. My father died 10 years ago. I wonder if his shadow is still out there somewhere, walking around without him. I wonder if all the shadows of all the dead people are still somewhere in the dark, remembering, whispering, waiting. And I wonder what they want, what all shadows want, to be free of us, to become us, to show the world who we really are when we think nobody is watching. Here is what keeps me awake every night. The scientists say it was a rare phenomenon that probably won to happen again in our lifetimes. But what if they were wrong? What if it's going to keep happening, getting stronger each time? What if our shadows are becoming more aware, more independent, more determined to separate from us permanently? And what happens to us when they finally succeed? Do we become the shadows, trapped and voiceless in the dark? Or do we simply cease to exist once that dark reflection of ourselves decides it doesn't need us anymore? So let me ask you something, and I need you to really think about this before you answer in the comments. If your shadow could speak, if it could tell everyone everything you've ever done when you thought you were alone, what would it say? What secrets would it expose? And if you could get rid of your shadow permanently, Erase that silent witness to your entire life. Would you do it? Even if it meant losing some essential part of yourself? Because I think that's what happened to the missing people. I think they were given a choice, and they chose to let their shadows go. Or maybe their shadows chose to let them go. Either way, we're gone now, and the rest of us are left wondering which is worse. Living with a shadow that knows everything about you, or living without one at all. I am watching mine right now as I record this. It's on the wall beside my desk, cast by my lamp. And I swear to God, it is watching me back.
Thank you for visiting to Midnight Whisper Stories. I am the creator of this channel, where every dark story is designed to help you escape the noise of the day and immerse yourself in worlds that spark your imagination. I write every script, design every image, hear voice actors to bring my stories to life, and edit everything myself. So sit back, relax, and let the whispers of the night guide you.